It is my sincere honor to introduce today's speaker, whose remarks I look forward to hearing with great anticipation. I told the people at my table, I even cut my vacation short to be here to hear her today. This is how excited I am. Angela Williams is president and CEO of United Way Worldwide, the first Black woman to lead America's favorite charity. She oversees United Way Worldwide's global network, serving 48 million people across 37 countries each year. With more than 30 years of leadership experience in the nonprofit and corporate sectors, Williams brings her innovative vision and a long history of purpose-driven work. Before joining United Way, Angela served as president and CEO of Easterseals, executive vice president, general counsel, and chief administrative officer at the YMCA of the USA, interfaith liaison for the Bush-Clinton Katrina Fund, special counsel on criminal law for Senator Edward M. Kennedy on the Senate Judiciary Committee staff, prosecutor on the DOJ Civil Rights Division's National Church Arson Task Force, which I remember quite well. You may too. There was a series of church arsons in the 1990s, and she was part of a very high-profile task force that worked to solve those and bring the perpetrators to justice, and an assistant U.S. attorney. Recently, she was named to Forbes' 2021 list of 50 women over 50 creating social change at scale. Please help me welcome Angela Williams to the stage.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here in Indianapolis. Is there any other place I should be? Just checking. And I should say, and I want you to know, I'm talking about the state, not just Indianapolis, because the state is more than just Indianapolis, right? Just trying to curry a little favor. Well, it's an honor to be here with the Economic Club of Indiana. And I also just want to say thank you for the person that was responsible for suggesting that I be invited, Chuck Preston, with Lilly Endowment. So if you appreciate my remarks, you can give Chuck credit. If you don't like my remarks, you can give Chuck credit. But I also want to just first acknowledge the CEO of United Way of Central Indiana and his staff. So you met Fred, but I'd like Fred and any of his team members that are here to please stand. And guess what? Serving the Hoosier State, we have 45 United Ways. So more of our Indiana United Way colleagues are here as well. And I like for them to stand, as well as any board members and volunteers. Thank you. It's so wonderful to have everyone here. And of course, I want to just thank our corporate partners that are here yesterday. Fred took me around town and I had the opportunity to meet with folks from the Lilly Corporation and Cummins, and of course, other corporate partners that PNC Bank, and so many more are here. And this afternoon, I get the pleasure of reconnecting with the Lilly Endowment team as well. Wonderful individuals if you have not met them. But what I always find when I go to these meetings is how, when you think about being in the heartland, I really do feel like there's a heart thing here when I come to Indiana, that the people are warm, welcoming, care about their neighbors. And I just want you to know that I feel that. And in fact, when I checked into the hotel yesterday, I couldn't go down the hall without every staff person saying, welcome. And that's a nice feeling to have. And I think it captures the spirit and heart of what is here in this state and what we are finding here in Indianapolis. And I want to acknowledge that, because in a world that is so incredibly divisive, in a world where there seems to be so much going on, it's nice to know that there are people that still want to have civil conversations, want to connect with their neighbors, that value each other. And I just want to say that's here. I'm right, right? And so that ties in with this message that I love. And this is a quote on the screen from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from the last book he published, entitled, "Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community?" And I love this quote. "A widely separated family inherits a house in which they have to live together. This is the great new problem of mankind. We have inherited a large house, a great world house in which we have to live together, Black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never, ever again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace." This notion of the world house is what we have inherited. It is a powerful thing to reflect on, especially now in the times that we find ourselves in. I believe that we're living in difficult times. All of us have had to navigate enormous challenges over the past few years, whether it's a global pandemic or a supply chain stretched thin, or social unrest or political polarization, a ground war in Europe, the Great Resignation, and worsening natural disasters that threaten our collective future. But as my colleagues and friends know, I am an optimist. People wonder, why do I always have a smile on my face? I just can't help it. I can't. Even when I'm having difficult conversations, there's still a smile. I just know that things will work out. I always have hope in the spirit of human beings to want to do good. No one wakes up in the morning, well, a few people do, but no one, let me back it up and say no one was born and came into this world thinking, I want to be evil. Things happen and you know, but the point is that we as human beings have this need for connection and supporting one another. And so as we consider this concept of the World House, I want to share with you my perspective on the power of collective action to transform communities and meet the needs of our neighbors. I'll also reflect on my time in leading a number of other global organizations, and also include what I have learned about being in this wonderful organization called United Way. It's also worth noting, however, that the Economic Club of Indiana started with a small group of people coming together to bring intellectual heft and community action to Indiana and the greater Midwest. And this hub, you all seated here today, are part of this desire to bring folks together and to hear from folks like former Secretary of State George Shultz, or the former president of South Africa, F.W. de Klerk. This is a place where people can come together and bring their own stories. And so I want to share with you a little bit about my story and my understanding and coming of age into the World House and embracing this notion of the World House. So my mother and father were leaders in the civil rights movements in the 60s. My dad was pastor of a Baptist church in Anderson, South Carolina, where I was born. He also served as the head of the NAACP for the state of South Carolina. And in that role, investigated a lot of heinous things that were happening to Black folks and challenging the status quo with leading clergy across multiracial lines, across denominational lines to say, as clergy, why don't we stand up and do the right thing for people? And we grew up in a household where our church members stayed in front of our house, slept overnight with shotguns to make sure that nothing happened to my family. We were under constant threat. And so with that, as a young person, that forms things in your mind, and it has an impact on you as a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, as you're listening to these conversations, as you're getting the feel of the atmosphere around you. You begin to feel the weight of the world, and you begin to feel the importance of using your voice and advocating for people and making sure that the world is a better place for all. And so what my dad did was, when I was about 5, he became a chaplain in the United States Navy. He was the 5th chaplain, Black chaplain in the history of the Navy. And his joining the military instilled a deep sense of service to our community and to the United States of America. That was ingrained on me, about service to our community, service to our country. And then that I followed my dad's lead and joined the military as a JAG, or Judge Advocate General Corps. I was a lawyer in the Air Force for 6.5 years. And as Deborah mentioned, I was with the Department of Justice in various roles. Served with the YMCA, serving youth, caring for youth, wanting to make a difference in the lives of youth around the world, recognizing that if we don't pay attention to our youth, then we won't have the leaders that we want later on to lead this country, to lead our organizations, and then working with Easterseals and working with people that are living with disabilities, and again, serving alongside them in work and in advocacy to support people with disabilities at Easterseals. And so all of this is just a reflection of my personal mission, and has always been this need to ensure that everyone in every community has access to health care, that they are able to get a job and have the ability to thrive and to get a good education. All of those are fundamental things to be able to thrive and live in community, and to be able to support not only yourself, but your family members, and to be a good neighbor. And so I take my roles and responsibilities very seriously. I look at this organization, United Way Worldwide, and the fact that it is 135 years old, and yet in these 135 years, the needs of communities still remain very much the same, even though the year may have changed, the century may have changed, the faces may have changed, even some of the organizations may have changed. The point is, people still need support. And with that comes responsibility. And so for me, leading the United Way and stepping up into this organization just over a year ago, when I saw the search, I said, that job is for me. When I read about what the opportunity was, when I saw what United Way Worldwide was doing in 37 countries, I said, this is a part of my calling and purpose, and I want to work alongside like-minded people, whether they're the staff, whether they're the volunteers, whether they're the donors, whether they are the recipients, whether they are the partner organizations and our corporate partners. What an awesome opportunity. And so when I look at where we are today, when I look at the opportunities we have, I think about how United Way serves as that convener. One of the things that I have always thought about when I think about creating equitable solutions in communities is that we have to, as nonprofits and as corporate partners, as foundations, we have to show up as partners, not saviors. And so what that means is, as do-gooders, as people that want to make a difference and have an impact in communities, we go into communities to say, we want you to have a seat at the table. You're affected by things that are happening in your community. Use your voice to tell us how we can co-create with you to come up with the solutions that will change the trajectory of you as an individual, your family members, and your community. And that's what I love about United Way. As a convener, we're able to create this table where we're able to make room for everyone. Everyone has a voice. Everyone can co-create. Everyone can dream about how we can make the difference. And so as I've settled into my role in it now for about 1.5 years, what I look at is the founding of the organization and where we are today. And I will tell you, the core values remain the same. First, we have maintained the belief that community is the cornerstone of society. We can talk about states, we can talk about regions, we can talk about countries, but it's your neighborhood. That is the essence. And so when we get connected within our neighborhoods and we begin to build from the ground up with neighbors helping neighbors, that's how we create transformation. That's why local infrastructure is at the core of United Way's model. No matter where we are in the world, our strategy is shaped by the unique needs and perspectives of trusted local voices on the ground. Second, we believe deeply in the power of collaboration. We recognize that we cannot do it alone. It's foolish to think that you can do it alone. So why not partner and collaborate to do things together? As a famous Methodist bishop said, no one can whistle a symphony. And finally, we believe in investing for the long term. United Way is best known for our work around emergency response, long-term response as well, but we're there during your best days as well as your work days. And so I look at what my colleagues here in the state of Indiana are doing. I know they're in community. I know they're talking to all of you. I know they're partnering with all of you. I know they're listening to the voices of those in community. And I know that together, collaboratively, we're able to make the difference. And so when I think about now, even taking a regional focus, a lot of what we do is focus in this part of the U.S. is focusing on youth success and early childhood development. I spent some time talking with Fred yesterday about the various initiatives that are happening around engaging young people. What we do know in Indiana is that Indiana has had tremendous rates of economic growth over the last several years, and you're fortunate to have such impactful global companies seated in your home state. That's a gift. But as of 2019, before the pandemic, 44% of all children in Indiana lived in a household with incomes below what we at the United Way called ALICE, meaning asset limited, income constrained, employed. Another way to put it, the working poor. So at United Way, we're here to help, but we're nothing without people like those of you in this room who want to be a force of progress among your neighbors. And whether it's through mentorship, job training, literacy centers, time, talent, treasure, however you can plug in and engage, all of that is key and important. So this local focus then ladders up to big change. And altogether, as Deborah mentioned, United Way Worldwide's community-based partnerships serve more than 48 people around the globe. But of course, our world has changed a lot in the last century, in the last decade, in the last 3 years, in the last 1 year. And we know at United Way that we must evolve with the times. And so my challenge as a new leader in this organization is for us to be not reactive to the times, but proactive. In other words, being able to watch and see the signals of what is happening to begin to forecast what's going to happen in the future. And how do we put ourselves in position to be around for another 100 years? I would love for us to be out of business, quite frankly. I would love all nonprofits to be out of business because we have fixed the social needs. But the way we have to do the transformation is, one, being relentless about data, looking at data, collecting it, looking at it, analyzing, looking at what are the signals, what is the data saying to us. We have to become a creative as an organization to be able to engage the multiple generations. We have about 3 or 4 generations in the workforce now. And so my generation may think and act, and well, does think and act differently from, say, generation Y, Z, et cetera. And so how do we engage all of the generations in a multifaceted manner to be both donors and volunteers? And then we have to begin focusing as an organization really on building network resilience. And so that our partner organizations, including those in Indiana, can continue to serve their communities for generations to come, and how legacy organizations like ours don't stay stuck. And this is the way we've always done it. And this has worked in the past, not recognizing that there's a need to be more nimble and agile. There's a need to be able to connect differently with folks. There's a need to really tap into technology in a different way, to be able to deliver services and products to people, and to engage and enable people to be able to be thriving. And so I know all of this, though, is rooted and grounded in one word: trust. Trust is critical to how we engage as human beings with each other, as organizations and corporations, with our employees, with the communities in which we operate and serve. And so that takes effort. And one of the things that I'm also working on with United Way is being intentional with our staff and being able to create the resources and to cultivate an ecosystem where everyone knows what their role is, and understanding that people are our greatest asset. So building and transforming that kind of culture, to me, is about giving my team agency and a seat at the table to envision the future they want to be a part of. And I want to empower people to be uncomfortable and to be able to flourish in the gray. Now, I'm a lawyer. I'm also an ordained Baptist minister. So, as my husband will tell you, I have a tendency to sometimes to be a little black and white. And he's like, Angela, you always think you're right. And I'm thinking, yeah, what's the problem? However, I'm a work in progress, admittedly. There is the gray. And in that gray, there can be uncertainty. There's not necessarily always a right answer or a wrong answer. There may be multiple answers, multiple perspectives, multiple ways of looking at a problem and reaching a solution. And so we have to embrace that now, because when we do that, we're able to then become comfortable in looking at experimentation and how do we think about things differently. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about is the work that we are doing with the Institute for the Future. The Institute for the Future trains futurists. And so one of the things that we are launching is the Next Gen Leaders. And we're starting a pathway over multiple years where we are training the younger generation within our United Way network to be futurists. And to be trained as a futurist, you learn how to look into the future at least 10 years. And then you also look back to see the lessons. So it's a future back approach of the last 30 years. And then you look at the now and look at signals that are happening. And it allows you then to imagine a future. And so just to give you examples, how many of you watch sci-fi movies? And if you recall the movies like from the 70s or 80s, how much of those things in those movies are now what we just are our current reality? Let me give you some examples, not even movies, like George Jetson. Okay. You know, and then you have, wasn't Rosie the robot? Yeah, and so, she cleaned, and then you had what is now the microwave, and you had the flying cars, and then if you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger's movie where he was the RoboCop or something, was that him? Terminator, thank you. And so we see robotics are real. Now we have these devices that compute and do everything for us when we talk. And even if you're embarrassed sitting in meetings and you say something and then your phone says, I didn't get that. How many of us have had that happen? Or when you now can write a sermon or write an essay, just plug into Chat GPT and get something that's actually pretty good. Now, I have not written a sermon. I'm just telling you, it's not me, and it's not my husband, but my husband's other pastor friends. I'm just saying. Not naming names, but borrowing from the Institute's language, we need people who disrupt short-term thinking with visions of transformative possibilities. And that's what I want for United Way Worldwide. That's what I want with our partner agencies, with our partner corporations, to be able to deliver that type of mindset as we continue to lean in to our future. And so I want to just close today by bringing us back to this notion of the World House that Dr. King wrote about. And less than a year after these words were published, he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. And on the night that Dr. King was killed, presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy was right here in Indianapolis. He was preparing to give a speech at the Broadway Christian Center on 17th and Broadway, just about a mile from where we gather today. Kennedy announced Dr. King's death to the crowd, and then he extemporaneously delivered a passionate plea for peace through togetherness for the community that Dr. King preached so often about. And Robert Kennedy said, what we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country. That night, the riots broke out in every major city in the United States, except Indianapolis. I wanted to close with this story to remind all of us that if you look hard enough, our histories are all inextricably linked. And sometimes the mere presence of someone at the right moment can make a big impact. We cannot control the turbulence around us, but we can seek to understand the external factors at play, lean on each other, and use moments like these to steady ourselves, rest, and come back a little stronger, a bit more inspired, and ready to keep up the good fight. So I want to know how many of you in this room are ready to do just that. Can I get an amen? Thank you.
Amen. You know, this is really inspiring to me. And, you know, your history of service and your public service leading you then ultimately to service to the broader public is something that I have kind of aspired to as well. So you are just an inspiration to me. Thank you so much. You know, beginning and ending with the quotes from Reverend King and from RFK, who I think most of us are familiar with Robert Kennedy's address that night, impromptu address, which really helped to calm the waters here. It just causes me to think, we're just more divided today than ever, it seems to me. How do we overcome those differences and find a way to work together to benefit society and lift people across the spectrum of society?
I think one of the failures that I'm seeing now is that people want to relate to each other in sound bites and opinions and not really relate to each other on a very human level. And I guarantee you there are maybe 400 people in the room, and so that means there are 400 different opinions. And we may not all agree, but can I look at you and see you as a human being? And can I listen and get to know you? Can I take the opportunity to understand what went into making you who you are? What is your life's journey? What are your passions? What do you like to do? What's your favorite color? Just how do you like to have fun? How do you interact with family? And so when we start having conversations with each other and seeing each other as human beings and not as sound bites, that's, I think, a gift that is not totally gone, but we as societies have not leaned into it.
And I
lately.
think we need to do a lot more leaning in that regard. We're hopeful that gatherings such as this will help us to do more of that. I'd like to talk about your discussion about futurism and being a futurist. And you talked about looking forward 10 years and back 20 or 30, I think you said, to try to disrupt short-term thinking with visions of long-term possibilities. How does that play in then to what United Way is trying to do now?
Well, we're actually gathering next week in Houston for our first summit since 2019. And we're working with the Institute for the Future. We're going to start introducing this notion of really future back thinking. And some of the elements of that include taking the time to look in various ways, like you could read newspaper articles, see magazines, watch TV, listen to people to get indications of what the future will look like. For example, we are getting those clear indications now with the number of people going out into space and the testing of systems for people to live in space or live in Mars. So we know that's something to pay attention to. So even now, what does that mean as people don't live necessarily in communities or neighborhoods as we know them today? What will be the needs of people as they're living in outer space, as whole communities and systems are transported out? What does that mean for those that are still here? You can take a look at transportation and how that's evolving in terms of some cities are testing out now the flying cars and looking at, so what does that mean? We already know driverless cars. We thought that was a thing of way in the future, and that's happening right now. In fact, I tested Fred to say, are you using that in your car? And he said no, so I was relieved because I was in the car with him. But so there are signals now. We can look at what else is happening, like GPT. So we know that AI is moving quickly. What else? How else is it going to evolve? How do we embrace AI? How do we shift what we're doing, given that AI will be guiding so many different things? So that's what we're talking about, looking at signals. But then within United Way Worldwide, so what does that mean? That means that the way we used to engage with donors and volunteers, the way we have delivered services, the way we have partnered has to also look different. And one of the things, last thing I'll say on this point, is what concerns me about the nonprofit sector is because we are so busy doing the work, heads down, in communities, helping people, that the future is already happening and it's in the now, and we haven't adjusted because we're so busy doing the work. And that's something that I think the sector needs to be more fluid and agile and be brought along in terms of thinking about the future and positioning ourselves now to continue to be that safety net.
And this brings to mind something that we talk about here at United Way Worldwide, or United Way of Central Indiana, and I'm sure you talk about it worldwide, is that, we are trying, as one of our esteemed Indianapolis leaders, Sam Odell, has said, and he's on our board, we're not trying to make people comfortable in poverty. We are trying to help them escape poverty. And that is a long-term problem. You talked a little bit about the fact that we have to be looking at the long term. How do we reconcile that with people that are accustomed to immediate gratification? And, this is not a problem you can solve with one intervention or 10 interventions or 1 year or even 10 years. It's going to take a long time. How do we bring people along so that we can accomplish that?
That's a good question. And one of the things that I think is important for us to understand is, again, as I said, we're living in a multi-generational society. And so, for example, when we say we want to invest in early childhood education, okay, that's great. But then what about the parent? What are we doing if the parent is maybe not literate, or the parent doesn't put emphasis on learning, or the parent doesn't have time to know how to help their own child? What are we doing on that level? And then as you do these interventions, and I think they're complex interventions, multifaceted interventions, and perhaps the parent, it may not be a literacy problem, it may be an economic problem where the parent has to work 2 and 3 jobs, and so doesn't have the time to monitor their child, and they're just trying to keep a roof over their head and food on their tables. Again, there are so many different factors at play. So here's a challenge I've been giving to a lot of our corporate partners as I've had conversations. And what I say is this: wouldn't it be great if instead of everybody having their signature program, like we just only want to focus on this one thing, which is fine, but how about where you have multiple, say 1 community, 2 communities, and they have multiple nonprofits and multiple corporations in that same 1 community, and everybody sits at a table and says, okay, let's look at the data. What is the top pressing issue in this community? What role are we going to play, and how can we solve for it together? And then that's the short term, but it's also a longitudinal approach. Just to give you a quick example, in Milwaukee, the leaders in Milwaukee, corporate and nonprofit, decided they wanted to eradicate homelessness in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They gave themselves a 5-year timeline. United Way served as the convener, bringing everybody together and basically convening and project management to do it. They did it. Milwaukee has done it. And it's because they decided we're going to focus on this one issue, all of us across sectors, and make it happen. So again, that now was 5 years. I consider that short term, but now think about the longer term effects that of what they did has for that city and its residents.
And maybe this calls to mind another question that I had, which is, you mentioned the importance of including, I'm going to be paraphrasing here, including those suffering from challenges in the creation of solution to those challenges. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because so often we come into a community and we say, look what I'm going to do for you. And what we really mean is, look what I'm going to do to you, as opposed to doing it with you. So how do you engage people who are suffering from the difficulties you're trying to resolve? in the solutions.
United Way, I think, again, does a really good job in just convening and having conversations. I'll give you yet another example in another city where in this one little community, no one had a higher than 8th grade, I think, or 7th grade education. And then at the local high school, most of the girls were dropping out by age 15 or 16 because of pregnancy. So when they dug into that, the United Way talked to the local Catholic parish that was there, and then the pastor of another church, and then the high school principal, and they just had a meeting and said, and the United Way staff didn't sit at the table. They stood around the room and said, can you all have a conversation? And we just want to listen and to hear what can we do and how can we help? And so the solution that the community came up with was the young girls that we'd love to come to school, but now we have babies. And so can you have childcare in the high school? So they opened up a childcare center in the high school. So the trajectory of that community has changed now, where you have people that are graduating from high school, young people graduating from high school, they're giving back, they're getting jobs, they're now going to college, and that's just having the community at the table. And so when I went to visit the community, the local pastor and the high school principal were there, and they said, you know, Angela, what was so unique about United Way is your staff, they didn't come sit at the table and dictate, they just invited us to come and have a discussion, and then they said, how can we help? After listening, and we, the community members, invited the United Way staff to sit at the table.
We have a question from the audience that is a little bit related to this, and that is this. Organizations like the one I work at, Martin Luther King Community Center, would welcome funding for collective action and grassroots advocacy from United Way. How can we align funding with organizing?
That's a good question. And where is that, at Indianapolis?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fred, raise your hand.
Fred should answer this one.
So I would say talk to Fred. But again, what I've seen modeled here, it's starting with, we went to, I would say about 20 years ago, we meaning United Way, to a collective impact model, and really saying for organizations, we need for you to have impact, to be able to show impact, and then align that with the pillars in which we operate. But I will say this, each United Way has made the decisions on how that looks. And so it always starts with a conversation to see how there can be alignment, how if funding is available, how that can be distributed. But I would definitely say from a United Way perspective, and I would say this on behalf of Fred, that we always welcome the conversations and always welcome how can we work together.
And we have a lot of organizations that are trying to accomplish some of the same ends. And so often we don't talk to each other. So that's critically important.
And can I say something to that effect?
No, I'm
though?
sorry. No.
Okay. Oh, look, two lawyers, right? So that's the start of a bad joke.
Walk into a bar.
Yeah. Yeah. Or what do you call it? Female prosecutor. Anyway, well, let's move on. One of the things that I also think is really important, and I'm talking about on behalf of the sector, is that some of the most, I sit on the board of Candid. And so Candid is the former Guide Star organization that used to basically give nonprofits like the good seal of approval, where foundations could go look and see, is this a good organization to invest in? And so one of the things that we're doing is really creating a database that is more inclusive and more holistic, that foundations and donors can use to give funds to nonprofits. One of the things that, as we were running the traps through the database, is I said, let's look at grassroots organizations, because some of the most effective organizations in community are the small community organizers. They're the ones that live in community. They know everyone, can call everybody by name and have the impact that's needed. And it's not always those of us that are part of these big organizations. And so I want to even infuse in that process the fairness, so that donors who want to see who's really being effective in a community can reach the smaller organizations to give them fundings. But the other thing too, I want to say that all nonprofits should learn how to work together. And how can we work together and squeeze out some of the administrative costs so that we can really focus on delivering the good.
I have several other questions, but unfortunately, they keep telling me we're running out of time. So is there one thing you'd like to say to this audience to encapsulate what you hope to accomplish by your advocacy?
All of us have time, talent, and treasure. And it's in varying degrees, but what's yours is yours. And so I would just commend you to think about the dash. And the dash is what's going to be on your tombstone. It has on it the date you were born and the date you die. And that dash represents a lifetime. What's in your dash? How are you using your time, talent, and treasure to make sure that dash is extremely meaningful? So thank you.
Angela, we're so grateful to you for joining us today. It was a perfect ending to this discussion, because we all now need to work on our dash. Some of us have less time than others, so we need to work fast. I'm serious, you know. But today's presentation will be available online at economicclubofindiana.com. So here we are at the end of our season. We're so grateful to everyone who helped make the 2022-2023 season possible. I want to give out special thanks to Anne Hathaway, who has served with great distinction as our program committee chair, and I know she's here somewhere. So Anne, thank you. And as a final reminder, if you parked in the Plaza Park garage across Capitol, don't forget to pick up a QR code as you exit to take advantage of the special parking rate from our good friends at Denison Parking. Have a wonderful afternoon. We look forward to seeing you back here in September. Thank you.